The scent of polished marble and cold steel is the last thing I remember. It's the smell of money. It's the smell of death. I'm on the floor. I can't move. My head is heavy, and the world is a smear of white and crimson. I look up. Adrian Moretti stands over me. The cuffs of his crisp white shirt, always perfect, are soaked. Not in wine, in my blood. His face, usually a mask of stone, is twisted with something ugly. Regret? No. Rage. He's the one holding the gun. He just shot me. You didn't listen, he snarls, his voice low and guttural. You broke the first rule. I cough, a wet, rattling sound, and a smile pulls at my lips. A final, wicked, beautiful smile. Even now, even dying, I feel no fear. I push a hand into the ruined pocket of my dress and pull out the worn silver locket. I toss it toward his polished shoes. It slides to a stop. The rule, I whisper, my voice fading, is that you don't get to hurt the people I love. My vision tunnels. Everything is going black. Then, the camera cuts away from the darkness, the blood and the gun. The silence snaps. The colors flood back. I gasp, my eyes flying open. I'm not on the floor. I'm in a small, cramped bedroom with beige walls. 5 days ago. I look down at my hands, shaking them, making sure they're real. My heart is pounding like a fist on a drum. I whisper to the empty room, I wasn't supposed to be here. They said no woman ever lasted a week with the Mafia boss. They said he was too cold, too ruthless, too broken. But I didn't come here to survive him. I came to change him. The target wasn't on his back, it was always on mine. Don't look away. Every secret, every kiss, and every bullet is coming for us. Hit that subscribe button now. You don't want to miss the shocking truth about what happened in those 5 days. You won't believe how this ends. They call his estate the fortress. I call it the cage. The wrought iron gates of the Moretti Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, were black, imposing, and stood guard over 10 acres of immaculate, terrifying quiet. I knew the moment the taxi dropped me off. The silence was the most dangerous thing here. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a hunter waiting for its prey. I was applying for a job as a house cook and personal assistant. A ludicrous lie, really. Everyone knew the job was just a way to get past the gates, a short-term contract for women who either quit within 72 hours or simply vanished. The stories of Adrian Moretti, the new, young, brutal dawn of the Moretti family, were legendary. He didn't just inherit the empire, he carved it out of stone and fear. He was a monster, gorgeous and lethal, and I was walking right into his jaws. I adjusted the simple black dress I wore. It was practical, invisible. My hands were steady, which was a small miracle. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. It felt like walking into a bank with a time bomb strapped to my chest. Stay calm. Blend in. That was the only plan. The mansion itself was absurd. Marble floors that reflected the ornate, silent ceilings. Art that looked like it belonged in a museum. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of expensive cigar smoke and something else. Something sterile and cold, like a freshly cleaned weapon. A woman with eyes that darted everywhere. Her name tag read Marcia, the head housekeeper, met me at the entrance. She looked like a ghost wearing a cheap uniform. "You're Lena Carter?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You look young." "I cook well, and I follow instructions perfectly," I replied, keeping my voice level, steady, and entirely unremarkable. I didn't blink. I made sure to meet her terrified gaze with my own. Marcia didn't look at my eyes for long. They had a way of unsettling people. "Well, you won't last. None of them do. Day 3 is usually the breaking point. The stress. The boss. He is demanding." I just nodded, following her through the sprawling kitchens. Everything was stainless steel and utterly silent. Not a sound of clanking pots, not a single giggle from the cleaning staff. Just whispers. The last one lasted 68 hours. A woman polishing silverware muttered to another, barely looking up. She broke a vase. He didn't even yell. He just looked at her, and she ran out the back door and drove her car into a tree. "The one before that?" the other cleaner whispered back, wiping her brow. She tried to flirt with him. Heard he shipped her out of state before sunrise. I listened to the terror, letting it wash over me without touching me. They were feeding the fear, keeping the monster alive in their own minds. Good, I thought. Let them be afraid. It'll make my job easier. Marcia showed me my room, a small clean box in the staff wing. He usually doesn't interview. If you're here, you're hired. For now. Your job is to cook 3 meals a day, exactly to his specifications, and keep the East Wing immaculate. Do not, under any circumstances, enter his office without an explicit order. And never, ever make eye contact. Got it, I said. Don't make eye contact. That's rule number 1. I already planned to break it. My first meal was lunch. I was told he ate alone in the main dining hall at 1 p.m. precisely. The menu was simple: pan-seared scallops, risotto, and a specific rare Bordeaux. The kitchen staff watched me like I was a ticking bomb. I worked with methodical focus, ignoring the whispers. I didn't rush, I didn't fumble, and I didn't spill. The risotto was perfect. The scallops were golden. I plated the dish myself and carried the silver dome on a tray down the ridiculously long hallway. The dining room was dark, save for a single spotlight above the boss's seat. He was already there, a silhouette of tailored, expensive fabric. I placed the dish silently, keeping my eyes fixed on the tablecloth, just as instructed. I lifted the dome. The smell of lemon and basil filled the air. I turned to leave. Stop. The voice was low, not a shout, a sound that cut through the silence like a razor blade. It vibrated in the air, cold and hard. I froze, my back to him. I was supposed to wait for dismissal, but my legs felt like lead. The wine, he said. I knew the wine. I had uncorked it, let it breathe for exactly 10 minutes. I turned, slowly, keeping my eyes on the crystal decanter on the sideboard. Is chilled, I answered, my voice quiet but steady. It's a 1999 Pomerol. It should be served cellar temperature, which is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It is currently at 58 degrees, just under the cellar floor, which will open the tannins better with the scallops. The room was absolutely silent. I could feel the invisible weight of his stare on my back. I was supposed to be a cook, not a sommelier. I just gave him an answer that only a high-end wine expert would give. I knew I had pushed the first button. You may go. His tone hadn't changed, but the single word was heavier than before. I walked out, my back straight. I knew the silence in the kitchen would be even louder now. I hadn't made a mistake with the food. I had made a mistake with him. I had shown him I was competent, perhaps too competent. As I walked back, I passed a huge, full-length mirror near the kitchen entrance. I stopped for a fraction of a second, enough to see my reflection. I wasn't shaking. My eyes were the color of steel and ice. On my inner wrist, partially hidden by the sleeve of the uniform, was a faint pink line. A burn scar. It was the only thing I carried from my old life, and the reason I was here. Lena Carter. Day 1. Adrian Moretti felt unsettled. Good. The tension had begun the moment our worlds collided. The countdown was on. I had 7 days to get what I came for. 7 days until I was either dead or free. He was a masterpiece of control. Every movement, every word, every silence was calculated. I was chaos, hidden behind an apron. Day 2 started before dawn. I was making his breakfast. A custom sourdough bread, poached eggs, and a specific blend of imported espresso. The kitchen staff were even quieter than before. They weren't whispering about the previous cook anymore. They were whispering about me. She talked back. She knew the wine. She's going to be gone by dinner. I worked my shift in a state of hyper-focus, listening to the rhythm of the house, the faint click of expensive Italian shoes in the upstairs hallway, the muffled sound of phone calls from the East Wing, always in rapid, harsh Italian. The house was a machine, and Adrian Moretti was the engine. He tested me. He had to. At breakfast, he ordered the eggs runny. I made them perfect. He sent them back. The yolk is too firm, the butler, Carlo, delivered the message, his eyes wide with worry. He says he likes them just set, barely cooked. I nodded, took the plate, and went back to the stove. I remade the eggs, this time pulling them out seconds before they were technically done. They were gelatinous, on the edge of raw. I knew he hated that. I sent the plate back out. 5 minutes later, Carlo returned. He looked confused. "The boss." He finished them. He said nothing. I hummed while I cleaned the plate, a light, cheerful tune that broke the oppressive silence of the kitchen. It was an old Italian folk song, one my brother used to sing. The staff flinched every time I did it. It was a cheerful noise in a place where joy had died years ago. Adrian was testing my compliance. He was a master at breaking people by giving them impossible orders. But I wasn't just complying, I was analyzing. He wanted obedience, but he also wanted to see if I had a spine. The soft eggs were his way of letting me know he saw my subtle defiance from the day before. The hum was my answer. "I see you too, boss." The orders got worse. He asked for the floor of the entire West Wing library to be hand-polished with lemon oil, a job that took a professional team 3 days. I finished it in 1 day, skipping my lunch break. He asked for a dinner that required 4 different rare herbs flown in from Milan. I found them at a specialty store in Manhattan and had them delivered by messenger before 4 p.m. I didn't complain, I didn't sigh, and I didn't rush. I moved with a calm that felt like an insult to his authority. My peaceful presence was slicing through the heavy, fearful air he had cultivated for years. On the 3rd night, I was cleaning the kitchen counters at 11:30 p.m. I was tired, my body aching, but my mind was sharp. I was pushing myself past the day 3 breaking point. Carlo, the butler, a man who seemed to exist only to look anxious, came into the kitchen. He was holding a small silver tray. On it was a note. "The boss requires a late-night tea," Carlo whispered, his hands shaking slightly. He specified, "Earl Grey, with exactly 3 leaves of fresh mint, steeped for exactly 2 minutes and 45 seconds. He said if it is 1 second over or under, you will be dismissed." This was the final test. This wasn't about the tea. It was about the pressure. It was a psychological weapon designed to make me fail, to make me crack under the weight of his impossible expectation. I didn't flinch. I poured the water, checked my wristwatch, and timed the steep perfectly. I counted the mint leaves carefully and placed them in the cup. I handed the tray back to Carlo. "Tell the boss," I said, my voice cutting and calm, "that the tea is perfect, and tell him that if he thinks mint is the hardest thing I've ever had to handle, he hasn't been paying attention." Carlo's jaw dropped. He looked terrified enough to faint, but he was a loyal servant. He took the tray and scurried away. I sat back down at the kitchen island, pulling out my small notepad. I wasn't writing recipes. I was writing down names, associates, locations, addresses, everything I could piece together from the hushed phone calls, the scraps of paper I found in the waste bins, and the documents I glimpsed on the office table when I briefly cleaned the hall outside the East Wing. The door to the kitchen swung open. It wasn't Carlo. It was Adrian Moretti. He stood framed in the doorway, a ghost in the moonlight filtering through the tall windows. He was taller than I expected, dressed in dark trousers and a soft, expensive wool sweater that somehow made him look less like a Mafia don and more like a predator resting after a hunt. He was beautiful in a terrible, frightening way. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, and now, finally, focused entirely on me. I looked up. I didn't avert my gaze. I met his eyes, a direct challenge, breaking his very first rule. He walked slowly toward me. The silence in the kitchen was a physical thing, pressing against my eardrums. He stopped right across the island from me. I could smell his cologne, something sharp, expensive, and European. "The tea was perfect," he said. His voice was no longer just low, it was dangerous. "But your message was a mistake, Lena Carter." "No, boss," I replied, my voice clear and steady. It was the truth. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the polished granite counter. He was sizing me up like prey. His eyes swept over my face, my composure, and then briefly down to the scars on my wrists. The faintest flicker of something, interest, Curiosity, acknowledgement, crossed his face before it snapped back to stone. "You're not afraid of me," he stated, not as a question, but as a puzzled fact. "No, sir," I said simply. "I've met worse monsters." He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes searching for the lie, the fear, the break. But he found nothing. He, the Mafia boss who ruled an empire through sheer terror, was, for the first time in years, completely unsettled. The rebel cook wasn't afraid. He didn't give me an order. He didn't fire me. He didn't threaten me. He just straightened up, his silence 1,000 times louder than any shout. "Go to bed," he commanded, his voice tight. As he turned to leave, I watched the expensive fabric of his sweater stretch across his back. He moved like a caged animal, a dangerous one. And I knew that in the 3 days I had been here, I had become the unwelcome guest, the disruption he didn't know he needed, or maybe the destruction he was trying to avoid. I smiled after he left. Day 3 was over. I was still here. I was here for a reason. But somewhere between the perfect tea and the broken rules, the line between my mission and the man started to blur. Day 4 was when the house started to change. Not physically, but in temperature. Adrian's presence was still a storm cloud, but it was centered less on the staff and more on me. He would find excuses to be in the kitchen or the hallway I was cleaning, not to speak, but just to watch. His dark eyes felt like spotlights, and I was forced to perform my mundane tasks under his terrifying scrutiny. The staff, particularly Carlo, were now moving in a state of confused terror. They had been trained for a boss who was predictable in his rage. They didn't know how to handle a boss who was simply quiet. I continued my mission, piecing together the information I needed. The man Adrian was targeting, the one who ruined my family, was a low-level associate named Salvatore Sal Rossi. He was careful, a rat who had hidden behind the Moretti family's shield. The papers I needed, the evidence, were supposedly hidden in a safe only Adrian could access. One afternoon, I was cleaning the study connected to the East Wing. It was lined with books, not just paperbacks, but leather-bound volumes that looked centuries old. As I dusted the shelves, I saw Adrian's reflection in a glass case. He was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching me. He hadn't made a sound. I kept dusting, pretending I didn't notice him. "You're very thorough, Lena," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, the way a scientist might note a chemical reaction. "It's the only way to do a job, sir," I replied, still focused on the spine of an antique book. "You're thorough, but you're careless," he countered. I stopped. I didn't turn around. Careless? I hadn't made a single mistake since I arrived. "In what way, boss?" "You keep trying to hide that." He was talking about the scar, the thin, raised line on my left inner wrist, usually tucked under my sleeve. I had forgotten, while stretching to reach a high shelf, that the fabric had pulled back. I slowly lowered my arm. I felt the familiar burn of shame and old pain, but I forced it down. I finally turned to face him. His expression was impossible to read. No pity, no disgust, just cold, neutral study. "It's an old cooking injury," I lied smoothly. "Hot oil." He took a slow step into the room. "No, that's a burn mark from a flat iron. And it's not old. It's badly healed. Hot oil splashes. That's a deliberate, sustained mark." My breath hitched. My composure, the perfect shield I had worn since I was 18, cracked. He saw right through the lie I had told everyone for years. The burn wasn't from a hot iron either. It was from the time Sal Rossi had decided I should pay for my brother's debt. He had pinned my arm to a table and held a cigarette lighter to my skin, slowly, deliberately. The wound had healed physically, but the horror of that moment was still raw. "It's none of your business, boss," I snapped, the formal deference crumbling away. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in curiosity. "Everything in this house is my business, especially the pain carried by the people who walk these floors. It's how I know where to strike." He paused, or where not to. I didn't offer anything else. I wasn't here to share my trauma. I was here for justice. But his comment, "where not to strike," was the first sign of something human beneath the stone. "You are carrying 2 suitcases, Lena," he observed, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The small one contains your clothes. The other is heavy and you treat it like glass. What's in the heavy one?" He hadn't even looked at my luggage. He just knew. His perception was terrifying. "My brother Peter," I admitted, the truth slipping out, heavy and unwanted. "He's sick, in a hospital in Jersey. I carry his medical records and the bills. They weigh a lot more than my clothes." Adrian didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply walked to a tall, locked cabinet and pulled out a bottle of amber liquid, a preposterously expensive single malt scotch. "He's the reason you're here, isn't he?" Adrian poured himself a glass, swirling the liquid. "You didn't take this job for the money, or you would have quit on day 2 when I doubled your workload. You took it because you're desperate. Desperate people do crazy things, like walking into a Mafia Don's house looking for a weapon." The air was electric. He knew, or he suspected. Everything I had been hiding, he had uncovered in 30 seconds. "I took the job because I needed a job," I insisted weakly, trying to regain my footing. Adrian took a sip of the scotch. "No, you took the job because you're looking for a key. You think my empire is broken, Lena. You think there's a soft spot. You think you can use it to get what you want, whatever that is. You think you see my scars." He walked over to a dark landscape painting, an oil canvas depicting a bleak, stormy coast. He brushed his hand against the lower corner of the frame. It moved, revealing a dark indentation in the wall, a hollow spot. "I don't have scars I try to hide," he said, turning back to me, his face granite hard. "I have wounds that I keep open, so I never forget how to fight." He didn't explain the indentation. He didn't need to. He had just shown me that the house held more secrets than I did. Then he did something completely unexpected. He looked past me, toward a framed photograph on a nearby table. It was an old, faded picture. A man who looked strikingly like Adrian, but softer, standing with a woman who had my quiet intensity. His parents. I had looked at the photo a dozen times. It was the only thing in the house that seemed personal. "They're the reason I'm like this," he said, his voice dropping to the deepest register. "Not because I missed them, but because I was the one who failed to protect them." He hadn't meant to share that. It was a secret torn out of him by my presence. He was trying to unsettle me, but instead, he had exposed a raw nerve. 2 broken souls in the same house, pretending they don't see each other's pain. I thought of my brother, Peter, who was dying slowly in a cheap hospital bed because of a monster. I thought of Adrian, who had clearly lost everything he loved and built a fortress of fear around himself. "It's okay to miss them," I whispered, the words coming out before I could stop them. They were words of comfort, not defiance. They were dangerously soft. Adrian flinched. Not physically, but in the flicker of his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. It was the moment I had hoped for and the moment I feared. I had found the crack. He turned away immediately, walking back to the door. "Get out, Lena, and don't speak to me unless spoken to." He left without looking back. I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of his dead parents and the weight of my own dying brother. I hadn't gotten the key, but I had gotten something better, a window into the boss's heart. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that the walls of the Mafia boss's heart had just trembled. The staff sensed something shifting. The house felt warmer, dangerous in a new way. It was no longer about a job or a mission. It was about a connection forged in shared devastation. And that was the most dangerous weapon of all. We were 2 sides of the same wound. He sealed himself off with violence. I sealed myself off with silence. But silence in that house was a language all its own. Day 5 and day 6 passed in a blur of escalating tension. Adrian didn't watch me anymore. He avoided me. It was like I was a highly contagious virus of emotion, and he was desperately trying to maintain quarantine. But his avoidance was a form of attention. The house felt less ordered. His calls were shorter. His meals were sometimes left half-eaten. His presence, which had once been a rigid source of fear, was becoming a source of erratic anxiety. I kept humming my Italian folk song in the kitchen. I kept making the perfect meals. I kept cleaning the East Wing, inching closer to the safe I knew held the documents I needed, the documents that could free Peter from Sal Rossi's debt and get him the treatment he deserved. The staff noticed. Giacomo, Adrian's chief enforcer, a massive, silent man with a face like a carved slab of granite, watched me with open suspicion. He and the other guards saw their Don's focus shifting. They saw a distraction. One morning, Giacomo cornered me in the pantry. He didn't touch me, but his shadow was enough to feel suffocating. "You're a poison cook," he rumbled, his voice like gravel rolling downhill. "You came in here, and the boss is different." "I just make the meals, Giacomo," I said, meeting his cold stare. "If the boss is different, perhaps he was due for a change." The Moretti family is built on fear, Lena. Change is weakness. Weakness is how enemies walk through the front gate. He leaned in, his eyes warning me. "If you cause trouble for the Don, I will remove you myself, and I won't bother with a taxi." I felt the icy threat, but I didn't recoil. "I am loyal to the person who signs my check, Giacomo. And right now, that's Mr. Moretti. Perhaps you should worry about who you're really loyal to." The subtle accusation hit him hard. He was used to blind compliance. He was not used to being challenged by a cook. He backed off, but his eyes promised violence. The countdown to destruction had begun, but it wasn't just my destruction. It was the Empire's. Later that day, Adrian found me in the West Wing, where the study was. I was meant to be cleaning the conservatory, but I was waiting. I had a feeling he would seek me out. He walked in, looking tired. He was holding a small, silver-framed photograph, the same one of his parents. He sat down on a velvet armchair, a rare sight of vulnerability. He held the photo loosely in his hands. "Tell me about Peter," he said, not looking up. His voice was exhausted. I hesitated. Sharing my pain was dangerous. It gave him leverage. But my plan wasn't working fast enough. I had to risk it. "Peter is 21, I started, sitting on the edge of the ottoman across from him. "He's not just my brother. He's my only family. When our parents died, he was 15. I raised him." I looked down at my hands. 3 years ago, he got involved with a bad crowd. Gambling debt. He owed a man money. The man was Sal Rossi. Adrian stiffened. His hands tightened on the photo frame. I had his attention now. Sal Rossi was one of the men who worked, loosely, for the Moretti family. A peripheral leech. "Rossi is an amateur, a lowlife," Adrian said, his voice tinged with disgust. "An amateur who broke my brother's spirit and his body," I countered, the bitterness sharp in my throat. "Peter is dying of kidney failure now. The stress, the drugs Rossi forced him to push, it damaged his organs. He needs a transplant. The hospital won't even put him on the list until the debt is cleared. The debt is $40,000. Adrian looked up at me then. His eyes were dark pools, deep with memory, maybe even pain. He was seeing the wreckage of his own family in my story. "You think I have the key to that problem," he stated. "I know you do," I confirmed. "Rossi is a snake. He has documents proving he skimmed money from your West Coast operations. I saw one of your guards, Marco, pick up a delivery box that had a small key in it, addressed to Rossi. I believe that key opens a safe deposit box containing the original skimming documents, the proof. If you expose Rossi, he goes down, his debt to Peter is nullified, and my brother gets his chance at life." I had laid out my entire mission, my life, my goal, all because of a single look shared over his dead parents' photograph. I was completely exposed. Adrian stood up, walking toward the fireplace. He put the photograph back on the mantelpiece, his back to me. "You walked into my house, broke my rules, and tried to manipulate me to save someone else," he said, his voice regaining its lethal quality. "That is either the stupidest thing a person has ever done, or the bravest." He paused, staring into the cold, empty hearth. "The documents you want are in the safe behind the painting in the study. Rossi has been a pain for months. His actions have been costing me millions. I just didn't have the time to deal with a rat yet." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was admitting it. He was giving me the truth. Then let me deal with him, I pleaded. Give me the evidence. I don't care about the money, just the nullification of the debt. He turned. You want to play the hero, Lena? Fine. But you need to understand something. I am a killer. I don't give things. I take them. What do you have that I could possibly want? The question hung heavy in the air. I had already given him my secret, my vulnerability, my heart's mission. I have no fear of you, I answered, standing up to face him. And you haven't been afraid of anything since your parents died. I can give you a reason to live, or I can give you a reason to hate me enough to kill me. Either way, you'll feel something again. The air between us sizzled. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But the silence that followed spoke volumes. He was a king without a crown of emotion, and I was the ghost who haunted his apathy. Day 7 arrived, the day every woman quits or vanishes. I walked into the kitchen wearing my uniform and started singing. I was still here. I was still cooking. I was still alive. I saw Giacomo in the hall. His eyes were wide with confusion, then grudging recognition. He knew. The king wasn't getting soft. He was getting distracted. The countdown to destruction was now a countdown to a collision, and everyone in the house, including Adrian Moretti, knew that a week that never ended was about to begin. I was supposed to be a fleeting shadow, another failed recruit. But Day 7 wasn't my ending. It was just the end of the beginning. Day 7 dawned, clear and cold, but the atmosphere inside the Moretti mansion was heavy, thick with unresolved tension. Adrian hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation in the study, but his movements dictated the rhythm of the house. He was restless, pacing the halls, taking calls in his office behind a constantly locked door. The air felt charged, like a wire about to snap. I went about my routine, but now it was a performance. I moved slowly, deliberately, singing under my breath as I prepared his breakfast, not to irritate him, but to mark my territory. I am here. I didn't leave. You didn't break me. The tension was so acute, I could feel Giacomo's eyes burning holes in my back from across the room. He and the other right-hand men were openly whispering. Marco, the guard who had received the key delivery box, looked especially nervous. They knew their Don was distracted, his focus pulled away from the business of fear and toward the woman in the kitchen. At 1 p.m., I delivered Adrian's lunch, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables. I placed it on the dining table, and this time, I didn't wait for permission. I turned to leave instantly. Wait. I didn't turn back. I knew what this was about. He had spent 2 days thinking about my demand, my offer, my entire desperate presence. It's Day 7, Lena, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. I am aware, sir. Every woman who has taken this position has either quit or been removed by the end of Day 7. They were either terrified, incapable, or they tried to use the position to manipulate me. You are the only one who fits all 3 criteria and is still standing. I am still standing because fear doesn't move me, boss, I replied, my voice steady. And I am using this position to save my brother. That makes my need greater than your threat. He pushed his chair back, the harsh scrape of wood on marble echoing in the silent room. He stood up. I could feel him approaching behind me. Sal Rossi, he began, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, is a small piece of dirt. Getting rid of him is easy. The documents you spoke of, the skimming reports, are in the safe. But using them to nullify a debt? That involves exposure. That involves the law, the police, things I do not touch. I finally turned to face him. He was barely 2 feet away. His intensity was breathtaking. I don't need the police, Adrian, I said, using his first name for the first time, testing the boundary. I need the leverage. I need proof that Rossi is a traitor to the Moretti family. You hand me that proof, and I will handle Rossi. He will erase Peter's debt, or I will hand the documents and him over to the authorities, along with his connection to your organization. I don't care about your world. I only care about Peter's life. He watched me, his dark eyes like twin magnets. He was studying the conviction in my gaze. He was looking for the crack, the moment of weakness, and he found none. That's blackmail, Lena, he stated. No, I countered, leaning forward slightly, meeting his aggression with quiet fire. That's a trade. You eliminate a threat, Rossi, and you get something in return. And what do I get, Lena? His voice was low, seductive, and terrifying. What could you possibly give me that I cannot take? I give you the one thing you exiled from this house. Peace, I whispered, the word hanging like smoke between us. You are surrounded by fear. Everyone lies to you. I don't fear you, Adrian. I see you. And I can give you a week of perfect, honest silence. I can give you a moment where you don't have to be the monster. His jaw tightened. He took a step back, breaking the proximity. My words had hit him hard. He was a man who lived to be the monster. He didn't know how to be anything else. Go to the kitchen, he commanded, running a hand over his close-cropped dark hair. Wait there until 6 p.m. If I haven't contacted you by then, you are dismissed, and you walk out of here with nothing. It was a final, desperate gamble. He was giving me an ultimatum: wait and hope, or leave now and save my dignity. I nodded and walked back to the kitchen. The staff, gathered in hushed groups, stared at me. Carlo looked like he was about to collapse. Are you still here? Marcia asked, her voice high and panicked. I'm waiting, I said simply, taking a seat at the main island. I didn't cook, I didn't clean. I just sat, watching the clock tick. Every second was agonizing. I could see Giacomo and Marco outside, looking through the windows, their faces etched with suspicion. They were watching me. They were watching him. They knew the king's distraction was making them vulnerable. Enemies start to whisper, the king's getting soft. The hours dragged, 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. The silence in the kitchen was torture. At 5:58 p.m., just 2 minutes before the deadline, the door swung open. It wasn't Adrian, it was Giacomo. He walked straight toward me, his face a mask of cold fury. The boss is too distracted. He's making a mistake. I won't let a nobody ruin decades of work. The time is up. Go to the kitchen, he commanded, running a hand over his close-cropped dark hair. Wait there until 6 p.m. If I haven't contacted you by then, you are dismissed, and you walk out of here with nothing. It was a final, desperate gamble. He was giving me an ultimatum: wait and hope, or leave now and save my dignity. I nodded and walked back to the kitchen. The staff, gathered in hushed groups, stared at me. Carlo looked like he was about to collapse. Are you still here? Marcia asked, her voice high and panicked. I'm waiting, I said simply, taking a seat at the main island. I didn't cook. I didn't clean. I just sat, watching the clock tick. Every second was agonizing. I could see Giacomo and Marco outside, looking through the windows, their faces etched with suspicion. They were watching me. They were watching him. They knew the king's distraction was making them vulnerable. Enemies start to whisper, the king's getting soft. The hours dragged, 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. The silence in the kitchen was torture. At 5:58 p.m., just 2 minutes before the deadline, the door swung open. It wasn't Adrian, it was Giacomo. He walked straight toward me, his face a mask of cold fury. The boss is too distracted. He's making a mistake. I won't let a nobody ruin decades of work. The time is up. It's 5:58, I said, looking him dead in the eye. 2 minutes. 2 minutes too long. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. You're leaving now, and you're leaving empty-handed. I didn't resist. I didn't struggle. My heart was pounding, but I kept my eyes locked on his. I can't lose this now. Peter needs me. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air, sharper than a razor. Giacomo, let her go. Adrian stood in the doorway, his eyes colder than I had ever seen them. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking directly at his loyal enforcer, and the look promised death. Giacomo's face went white. He dropped my arm instantly, stepping back as if burned. Boss, she's a problem. She's a risk. I decide the risks here, Adrian growled, walking into the kitchen. He didn't raise his voice, but the entire room, the staff, the guards, even the stainless steel, seemed to shrink. You follow orders, or you are no longer welcome in my house. Giacomo nodded once, a deep, humbling bow. Understood, boss. He shot me a look of pure hatred and retreated. Adrian walked up to me. He held a simple, unmarked manila envelope. The debt nullification papers for Peter Carter, he said, handing me the envelope. The proof you need on Rossi is inside, along with a certified letter of debt termination, paid in full. I took the envelope, my hand shaking for the first time since I arrived. Peter was safe. Why? I managed to whisper, looking up at him. Why did you wait until the last minute? He looked down at me, his face unreadable. Because I needed to know what a woman who doesn't fear me looks like when she thinks she has lost everything. You passed the test, Lena. You are the only person in this house who has never looked at me with fear. He leaned in, his voice dark and potent. You got what you came for. Now I will get what I need. Stay. The countdown to destruction began in earnest now. I had crossed the threshold of day 7 and cemented my place in his heart, and painted a target on my back. We had made a pact over blackmail and salvation. But pacts in the Mafia world are rarely sealed with handshakes. They are sealed with fire. I spent the next day, day 8, in a state of stunned disbelief and frantic action. I contacted Peter's hospital administrator, faxing the certified debt termination letter. Peter was officially cleared. He was on the transplant list. He was safe. I had won. But I hadn't left. I was now an employee with an open-ended contract, a silent promise, and a deadly secret. Adrian was treating me differently. He didn't give me impossible orders. He just expected me to be present. I cooked his meals, and he ate them. We didn't talk about Rossi, Peter, or the past. We spoke about trivial things: the weather, a specific blend of coffee, the quality of a vintage film he watched one night. We were dancing around the emotional chasm we had created. That night, a colossal storm hit the eastern seaboard. Rain lashed against the mansion windows, and the wind howled like 1,000 banshees. It was the perfect backdrop for chaos. At 10 p.m., a massive crack of lightning struck a transformer nearby. The lights went out instantly. The mansion plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The house reacted like a body seizing up. Alarms started to chime softly, automatically switching to backup battery power. The guards immediately moved into high alert. The storm wasn't just weather, it was a threat multiplier. I was in the kitchen, organizing supplies, when the power cut. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the low moonlight filtering through the storm-lashed panes. Adrian found me there. I heard his footsteps first, heavy and fast, followed by the faint click of a safety being released on a firearm. "Lena," he barked, his voice tight. "Where's Carlo?" "He went to check the generator in the cellar, boss," I answered. He grabbed my arm, not gently, but possessively, and pulled me toward the nearest wall. "Stay here, stay silent. This weather is a perfect distraction." He wasn't talking about Rossi. Rossi was dealt with. He was talking about the larger threats, the rival families who had been waiting for Adrian to slip up. Giacomo's words echoed in my head. The king's getting soft. We stood against the cold stone of the wall. The only light was the intermittent flash of lightning, illuminating Adrian's profile, sharp, tense, and lethal. The proximity was devastating. His warmth was a stark contrast to the cold air of the kitchen. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't the intentional silence we shared before. It was a pressurized, panicked silence. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. I was trembling, not from fear of him, but from the raw, exposed nerves of the last few days. The storm, the darkness, the close-up threat of violence, it was all too much. I was crying. Silent, fat tears rolling down my cheeks. "Yes," I admitted, my voice a broken whisper. "I'm terrified. I'm terrified that after everything, after I saved Peter, something will happen and I'll lose him anyway. I'm terrified of being weak again." He turned fully toward me, cupping my face with his large hands. The cold leather of his gloves contrasted with the heat of my skin. "Look at me, Lena," he commanded. I lifted my eyes, meeting his gaze. In the flash of lightning, his eyes were a startling, intense black. They were no longer cold, they were fierce. "You are not weak," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly vow. "You walked into my house, broke me down piece by piece, and got exactly what you wanted. You are the strongest person I have ever met." And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't a sweet storybook kiss. It was desperate, forbidden, and raw. It was a release of 7 days of pressure, a collision of two broken, damaged people who had built walls to survive and found each other's cracks. His lips were demanding, his body pressed against mine, a wordless communication of violence and need. I kissed him back with equal fury, grabbing the back of his neck, pulling him closer to the chaos. It felt like falling off a cliff. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it obliterated everything that came before. When he pulled back, he was breathing hard, his control shattered. "That," he gasped, his forehead resting against mine, "was a mistake." "No," I whispered, touching my fingers to my swollen lips. "That was the truth." We both realized the gravity of the moment. We had crossed the line. The sterile, cold arrangement was over. Love, or whatever this desperate, destructive need was, had entered the Mafia empire. And love inside this empire was a dangerous, volatile weapon. It didn't offer protection. It just painted a bigger target on our backs. The faint sound of a vehicle engine, muted by the storm, reached us. It was heavy, and it wasn't the generator. Adrian's face immediately snapped back into the cold mask of the dawn. "Get down." He shoved me behind a granite counter just as the first gunshots cracked outside the kitchen windows. The sound was deafening, amplified by the rain. The attack had begun. The kiss didn't bring peace, it brought war. In the space of one breath, I went from saving my brother to fighting for the man who saved him. The first volley of bullets shattered the reinforced kitchen windows, sending shards of glass flying. Adrian immediately shoved me harder behind the thick granite counter and drew his handgun, a heavy, silent weapon that looked like an extension of his own cold will. "Stay down, Lena!" He roared over the chaotic noise of the storm and the gunfire. The attackers weren't subtle. This wasn't a professional hit. This was a loud, blunt message from a rival family. Probably the D'Angelo crew, Adrian's oldest enemies, who had been waiting for him to show weakness. And I, the rebel cook, was the neon sign blinking weakness above his fortress. Adrian moved with devastating speed and precision. He didn't panic. He fired 3 quick, controlled shots toward the doorway leading to the main hall, silencing the immediate threat. "Giacomo! Report!" he yelled into the darkness. Giacomo's voice, strained and harsh, came back over the intercom system, which was running on reserve battery. "East Wing is breached, boss. They came through the garden wall. Heavy fire. We're being flanked." Adrian cursed under his breath in fluent Italian. He turned toward me, his face grim. "They're after me, Lena. They saw the shift. They saw the hesitation. This is the consequence of letting me feel again," he said, his eyes drilling into mine. "I need you to get out. Now." He pulled me up and pushed me toward the servants' stairwell, which led to the exterior exit near the garbage docks, a discreet escape route. "Go to the cellar," he commanded. "Find Carlo. He'll get you a car. Don't look back." I could hear the sickening sound of furniture splintering and more gunfire erupting from the main floor. The attack was moving fast. Adrian was leaving the kitchen, heading straight toward the battle in the East Wing. I took 3 steps toward the stairwell, and then I stopped. "Go to the cellar. Don't look back." He had saved Peter. He had paid the debt. He had shown me the one flicker of humanity he possessed. And now he was facing death alone because I had been his distraction. If I left, I would be saving myself, but I would be destroying the one person in this terrifying world who had genuinely helped me. My entire mission was built on defiance, not survival. I turned back. Adrian was already disappearing through the archway, his figure dissolving into the shadows and flashes of violence. "Adrian!" I screamed. He didn't hear me. Instead of going down, I ran up the stairs, following the sounds of the heaviest fighting. The upper hallway of the East Wing was a nightmare. Smoke was filling the air, illuminated by the flashes of muzzle fire. The air smelled like cordite and rain. I saw Giacomo pressed behind a huge marble bust, reloading his shotgun. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm, his face covered in soot. Two D'Angelo men were trying to storm a heavy oak door, Adrian's office. Adrian was already inside the office, using the heavy door as cover, firing precision shots. The D'Angelo thugs paused, yelling to each other. One of them, a man I recognized from Adrian's profile folders as a key D'Angelo lieutenant named Vito, pulled a long, heavy chain from his belt. He was going to try and breach the door. Giacomo, injured and out of position, was too far away to stop them. Without thinking, I grabbed the heavy, decorative bronze bell that sat on a nearby side table, the one used to call the servants. It was ridiculously heavy. I ran down the hall, directly into the fire zone. "Vito!" I screamed, using the name I remembered. The two men paused, confused, turning toward the sound of the hysterical woman. It gave me the split second I needed. I hurled the bronze bell with all my strength. It didn't hit Vito, but it hit the ground next to him, skittering and making a massive metallic clang that was deafening in the hallway. Vito flinched, momentarily blinded by the noise and the absurdity of the attack. That was all Adrian needed. Crack, crack. Two quick shots from the office doorway. Vito and the other thug collapsed immediately, silenced. Silence rushed in, broken only by the storm and the pounding of my own heart. Adrian emerged from the office, holding his gun steady. He looked at the bodies, then looked at me, standing in the hallway, panting, with the smell of metal and fear all over me. Giacomo stared too, his mouth slightly open in shock. "What in God's name are you doing?" Adrian's voice was low, furious, and vibrating with adrenaline. I walked toward him, my legs wobbly, ignoring the danger. I stood between him and the bodies, my small figure shielding his large frame. I was trembling violently, but the defiance was absolute. "I asked you to leave," he yelled, finally breaking his cold control. "And I refused," I shouted back, tears of pure terror and adrenaline streaming down my face. "You think I walk away now? After you saved my brother? No. If you fall, Adrian, who will they fear? They'll come after me, after Peter, after everything you touched." I grabbed the front of his sweater, gripping the expensive wool. "You are the center of this world. If the core breaks, everything shatters. You stand and you fight, and I'm right here." He stared at me, his eyes wide, a flicker of something ancient and primal crossing his face. I wasn't challenging his power. I was accepting his curse. I was embracing the madness. Giacomo slowly lowered his shotgun, looking from Adrian to me, a sudden, stunned comprehension in his eyes. The moment cemented my place in Adrian's heart, not as a servant, not as a threat, but as his partner in the chaos. I had refused to leave. I had stood in the line of fire. I had just painted the biggest target in the world on my back, and I knew it was worth it. Adrian slowly holstered his gun. He reached out and touched my face, his thumb wiping away a tear streak mixed with soot. "You should have been afraid," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I've been afraid my whole life," I told him. "I'm done with it. Now we fight." The main part of the assault was over, thanks to my absurd distraction. Adrian signaled Giacomo, who immediately started securing the perimeter, his skepticism of me replaced by a grudging, awestruck respect. But the worst was yet to come. The house may have survived the D'Angelo attack, but the emotional blast radius was just starting to expand. I saved him from the bullet, but I couldn't save us from the fire. The moment I became his shield, the universe demanded a price. The immediate aftermath of the assault was a whirlwind of controlled, furious activity. Giacomo and the remaining loyal guards secured the ground floor. Adrian was everywhere, giving orders, directing the cleanup. His cold competence returned, only now it was underscored by a frantic energy I knew was directed at my safety. He refused to let me leave his side. He wasn't gentle, he was obsessive. He moved me from the East Wing back to the kitchen, where a few of the staff, terrified but loyal, were starting to emerge. "Make yourself useful, Lena," he snapped, handing me a first aid kit. "Giacomo has a graze. Clean it." It was his way of keeping me occupied, and more importantly, in his line of sight. As I cleaned the blood and soot from Giacomo's arm, the guard looked at me with an intensity that was startling. "You saved his life," Giacomo muttered, his voice rough. "And you saved mine. I would have been too late for Vito. That bronze bell, it gave the boss the opening." "I did what I had to do," I said simply. "I don't play games, Giacomo. I protect what's mine." He nodded slowly. "You're not a cook, Lena. You're a soldier. A fool, but a soldier." Adrian was on the phone, the emergency satellite line, his voice low and deadly, giving instructions to his wider network. He was organizing the counterattack, the swift and brutal retribution that would follow this breach. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the storm, a distant, rising siren. It wasn't the police, it was a fire truck. Carlo, the butler, burst into the kitchen, his face streaked with tears and terror. "Boss! The garage! They torched the garage! They hit the fuel tanks!" A deep rolling whump shook the entire mansion. The D'Angelo crew had planned a scorched earth retreat. They hadn't just tried to kill Adrian, they tried to burn the Moretti fortress to the ground. "Get everyone to the reinforced pantry now," Adrian yelled. "Giacomo, take the lead!" Adrian grabbed my hand. His touch was not loving. It was a desperate clutch. He pulled me toward the pantry, a thick-walled room designed as a fallout shelter. But as we ran, a massive explosion ripped through the adjoining utility wing. The force was enormous. Concrete cracked, and a wall of hot, choking smoke and flying debris blasted through the hallway. The explosion caught Giacomo, who was leading the frightened staff, and pinned him against the far wall. A huge chunk of ceiling had fallen onto his legs. He was screaming, muffled by the smoke. Adrian saw it. He stopped, his eyes wide with a terrible conflict. Loyalty to his most devoted man, or saving the woman he just admitted he needed. "Go, Lena, go!" he yelled, releasing my hand and turning to run toward the immobilized Giacomo. I saw the fire spreading rapidly, consuming the hallway, roaring through the air ducts. I saw the splintered wood and the heavy burning wreckage that had crushed Giacomo's legs. And then I saw the problem. A second later, I realized the smoke was too thick for Adrian to reach him. "No!" I screamed. "The main valve! The fire suppression system!" Adrian froze. The fire suppression valve for the utility wing was located on the wall near the stairwell, directly past the largest patch of fire. "It's too close to the main fire. You'll be burned," Adrian yelled, turning to me with horror. But I wasn't listening. I had to get Giacomo out. He was Adrian's foundation, the man who held the machine together. I couldn't let him die, not when he had just accepted me. I sprinted toward the wall of flame. "Lena, no!" Adrian's voice was a primal roar of fear and desperation, a sound I had never heard from him before. I reached the wall. The heat was unbearable. I threw my apron over my face, ducked low, and plunged through the thickest smoke. My uniform jacket immediately caught fire on one sleeve. I slapped it out frantically and found the wheel handle, the main suppression valve. I grabbed the heavy metal wheel. It was searing hot. I gripped it tighter, ignoring the blinding pain in my hands, and turned it with all my strength. Crank, crank, crank. With a shuddering hiss, the overhead sprinklers in the utility wing burst to life, spewing water. The fire shrieked as it met the deluge, and the smoke momentarily cleared. I stumbled back, my lungs burning, my skin stinging, adrenaline the only thing keeping me upright. I had saved them. I had saved Giacomo. I looked up, trying to see Adrian. He was running toward me, his face twisted with pure, raw terror. "You idiot!" he screamed, not in anger, but in relief and fear. I took one step toward him, then my vision blurred. The ceiling that had collapsed on Giacomo was unstable. The suppression system had cleared the fire, but the water had weakened the structure. A massive, heavy support beam, still smoking, tore loose from the ceiling directly above me. I didn't hear Adrian's final, desperate cry. I only felt a searing, blinding pain across the back of my head. The world tilted violently. The last thing I saw was Adrian, running toward me, his hand outstretched, his face dissolving into utter devastation. I collapsed. Smoke, screams, and sirens, and the Mafia boss on his knees beside her lifeless body. I was lying in a rapidly spreading puddle of water and blood. Adrian reached me, throwing himself down, his hands trying to staunch the blood flowing from my head. He was yelling my name, his voice ragged. For once, the man who never begged. He was cradling my head, rocking me, his tears, hot and shocking, hitting my soot-stained face. He was praying, pleading, to a God he hadn't believed in for 20 years. And then, everything went silent and black. I woke up in silence, not the fearful silence of the mansion, but the sterile, heavy quiet of a place where life hangs by a thread. The machine that was Adrian Moretti had paused for me. The first sensation was the hum, a low, constant electrical drone. Then the smell of antiseptic and old sheets. When I finally forced my eyelids open, the light was blinding. I was in a hospital room, a very expensive private one, judging by the size and the high-end medical equipment. Days blurred. I drifted in and out of consciousness. I knew I had a serious concussion, burns on my arm and hands, and bruised ribs. I was fragile, broken, but alive. But the most shocking thing wasn't my pain. It was the presence in the room. When I was finally coherent enough to focus, I saw him. Adrian Moretti. He hadn't moved. He was sitting in an uncomfortable-looking chair in the corner of the room, still wearing the dark, wrinkled sweater and trousers from the night of the fire. His face was covered in a day's worth of stubble, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He didn't look like a Mafia don. He looked like a refugee. The minute he saw my eyes tracking him, he was instantly by my side. "Lena," he breathed, his voice rough and unused. "You're awake. Stay still." He didn't touch me, but the sheer, potent relief radiating off him was a physical force. "How long?" I whispered, my throat dry and sore. 3 days, he said. He poured a glass of water and helped me take a sip. "The beam barely missed your spine. You're lucky. You're going to be fine." I looked around the room. There were 2 massive, quiet men, not Giacomo, but equally imposing, stationed at the door. The security was tight. The Mafia boss hadn't just secured a private room, he had created a fortress within the hospital. "Giacomo," I croaked. "Is he—" "He's alive," Adrian said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Broken legs. He'll be out of commission for months. You saved him, Lena. The doctors said another minute, and the fire would have hit the oxygen tanks in that wing." I closed my eyes, absorbing the victory, the cost. "Why are you here, Adrian?" I asked. "The city knows you were attacked. Your enemies will be moving. You can't be away from the compound for 3 days. You're leaving your empire exposed." "The empire is fine," he said, his voice flat. "Giacomo and the others are handling the cleanup. The D'Angelo family paid their debt for the attack before dawn yesterday." His tone suggested brutal, swift vengeance. He then reached out and gently took my burned hand, ignoring the bandages. "I am here, Lena, because I am not leaving you. I almost watched you die. Twice. Once by my own hand, and once saving my life and the life of my lieutenant." He lifted my hand and pressed his forehead against my knuckles. It was a gesture of profound respect and shattered control. "I built that life," he continued, his voice barely audible. "The money, the fear, the power. I built it so nothing could ever touch me again. I built it on the principle that weakness is death. And you, the woman who walked in to save her brother, became my greatest weakness. And I couldn't move." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me again. "When that beam fell," he confessed, "I begged. I begged God. I begged the devil. I offered everything I own, everything I built, everything I am, just to keep you alive. The empire I built through fear now feels hollow." The revelation was staggering. The man who commanded armies of fear had just admitted he was ruled by love. "You stayed," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. It wasn't a question. It was the absolute, unvarnished truth that broke through all his defenses. Every woman before me had run away, been dismissed, or taken advantage. He hadn't just stayed, he had pressed pause on his entire world. He turned back to me, his dark eyes shining with an emotion that looked dangerously close to love and a terrifying possessive need. "I stayed because you are the ghost of everything I lost, Lena. You have the fire I put out in myself when I was a boy. I need to keep you close, or I will lose myself completely." He walked back and sat beside me, his large, powerful hands resting on the blanket. "I'm ready to lose power if it means keeping you. I'm ready to change the rules of the Moretti family. For you." He hadn't offered a proposal of marriage or a romantic future. He had offered a pact in the darkness, a promise to dismantle a part of his monstrous life just to keep my light near. I smiled, despite the pain. The cold, impenetrable Mafia boss was gone. The scarred rebel hadn't just lasted the week. She had broken the king. "Good," I murmured, resting my head back on the pillow. "Because I don't follow the rules, Adrian. I write new ones." He taught the city to fear him. I taught him to feel again. We traded our scars for a promise, and found that love doesn't save us from the darkness. It just teaches us how to live there without losing ourselves. Months later, the house was rebuilt, but it was no longer the fortress. The marble floors were still polished, but the air was different. It didn't smell sterile anymore. It smelled faintly of lemon and fresh laundry. The large, sprawling east wing where Adrian's office used to be was now a small, well-stocked library and living space. The mansion was smaller, quieter. The massive, intimidating wrought iron gates were still there, but there were no longer guards stationed every 20 feet along the perimeter. Most of the old staff had been let go, replaced by a smaller, hand-picked group who were paid well and trusted. Adrian still carried his gun. I had seen it, tucked securely into the back of his waistband under his jacket. But he didn't carry it for his protection. He carried it for mine. He had kept his promise. He had pulled back. The Moretti family was still in power. You don't walk away from that life entirely. But Adrian had shifted his focus. He no longer ran the brutal street operations. He managed investments, businesses, and clean money. He had built a wall of legitimacy around the illegitimacy. My scars were healing. The deep concussion was gone, and the burns on my hands and arm were now silvery, faint reminders of the night of fire. The trauma of Peter's debt and my desperate mission felt like a lifetime ago. Peter was doing well. He had received his transplant, and I had used a substantial amount of the money Adrian gave me, an obscene amount, to buy him a small, quiet apartment in Vermont where he could recover in peace and privacy. He still thought I was working as Adrian's assistant. I hadn't told him the full, terrifying truth. Adrian and I were sitting on the sun porch of the rebuilt West Wing. He was reading a financial report. I was knitting a terrible, lopsided scarf, a new, ridiculously domestic hobby. "They're still whispering about you," Adrian said, not looking up from his paper. "Who?" "Everyone," he replied. "The rivals, the cops, the old associates. They whisper, 'No woman lasts a week with the Mafia boss.' They say I'm weakened. They say I'm done." I put down my knitting and reached out, touching the smooth, sharp line of his jaw. He put his report down immediately, his cold focus instantly shifting to me. "Are you done, Adrian?" He looked at me, a low, possessive fire in his dark eyes. "I am done with fear. I am done with loneliness. I am not done with this life, Lena. I'm just done running it the way they expected me to." He wrapped his large hand around mine. "They're right. No woman ever lasted a week with the Mafia boss. None of them ever did." "But the scarred rebel didn't just last," I finished for him, a quiet triumph in my voice. "She changed the ending." We had found a middle ground, a quiet, dangerous truce within his kingdom. He was still the king, but I was the foundation. The world outside was still cold and violent, but inside the mansion, there was a startling, protective heat. That night, Adrian and I stood on the main balcony, looking over the quiet, manicured grounds. The air was calm, finally free of the scent of fear and smoke. Adrian Moretti built an empire on the promise of pain. I broke down his walls with the promise of honesty. Maybe we were both monsters in our own way. Him, the killer who needed to be needed. Me, the survivor who needed to be feared. He put his arm around my shoulder, pulling me close. He taught the city to fear him. I taught him to feel again. Maybe love doesn't save us from darkness. Maybe it just teaches us how to live there without losing ourselves. We were two broken pieces that fit together, not perfectly, but precisely where we needed to be. Did the silence, the suspense, and the fire in this story move you? If you crave more tales of desperate love, high-stakes danger, and heroes who break all the rules, subscribe now. Don't miss the next chapter in our world of risk and romance. More love and danger await.